Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about my favorite subject. I don't have anything to add in terms of by way of introduction, so you could I'm ready to go.
All right. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're not seeing the awesome background that Michael has. It is psychedelic. And I'm having my own little fun experience with the background.
Gotta keep it on brand.
So I only know Michael through one of our joint friends. And one of the first things Michael shared with me was an article where he talked about the difference between the intrinsic and conditioned ego, which I would love to just start with right there. When you first noticed, Michael, that you had an ego and that there was such a thing as childhood conditioning, and waking up from realizing you were sort of just running through your programs.
Oh, sure. That's a great question. I realized I had an ego because I was always interested in psychology. So even in high school, my plan was to become a clinical psychologist. I was just going to go that direction. And so I learned about, the basic, Freudian version of the ego, and then more modern conceptualizations of what ego might be. I went to graduate school for social psychology because that just seemed more interesting to me, since we're social animals, and recognizing the influence of groups and of other people, of society, of now social media, although that was quite a thing when I was in grad school, on the individual and how that sort of builds up something that you might term an ego. Our beliefs and our structures, our attachment patterns, all those kinds of things that operate usually outside of awareness. Where I first big experience, because I was operating, I think, mostly from a adapted sense, or I would say an adapted sense. Not from my soul, as you would call it, as well. Was when I went to Peru about 10 years ago, and I did ayahuasca in a retreat, and it was, the first hour was probably the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced, and then I got it together, and it was the most beautiful experience I've ever had. I mean, I've had several experiences since then, equivalent, but I recognized at that point in time, I was like, oh, there was something to do with drinking, alcohol. And, I definitely wasn't an alcoholic, but I was relying on alcohol, self-medicating for some reason. And I recognized that there was some kind of like shame in there, like that I was trying to mask with drinking beer and whatnot. And, and I was like, in this expanded state, which is really quite powerful and opens you up to way more awareness than we have in our regular, consensual reality. I first recognized that there was a shame that was operating in the background, and I tried to understand what it was about. And I said, well, geez, it's so weird that there is this sense of shame, the felt sense of shame that I'm trying to cover up with the drinking. And I don't have anything to be ashamed of. And I just kind of dropped it. And then when I came home, I just didn't drink anymore, for the longest time, several years. And then kind of had that experience again. Started drinking again, and then had another experience where it's like, you're drinking because you're bored, so do something else. and so then I just filled my life with doing all kinds of other things, including getting into this space and learning more about this. And now I'm, I wouldn't even have, I don't have time for anything like that anymore. But I'm much more, I enjoy life a lot more.
So back to the sort of the ego, how did you even end up going to do a ceremony, and what was your life like before? Did you notice that you were in an egoic space, just sort of working off of a conditioned response, or?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I kind of stumbled upon the experience. It was, my wife at the time and I were seeing a coach, and we were enmeshed in business, and we're enmeshed socially, and we're enmeshed at home and with the kids. And my wife had started to do something outside, started to take some classes and such. And the coach said that suggested that I do something outside. My first inclination was to go to the Philippines and learn how to kite surf. That was what I wanted to do.
Oh, wow.
That was the first inclination. And then And then my wife was like, I wanted to do that too. We wanted to do that together. So I was like, oh, okay. So this is off the table. And then I talked to a friend of mine while we were, partying somewhere. He was overweight. And I said, hey, the coach said I had to do something, but she didn't say, I have to do something away from my wife, but she didn't say I couldn't do it with a friend. You want to do something? And he said, yeah, I've always wanted to go rappelling in the Andes. There's this place you can go. You rappel into this like sinkhole, and there's like the evolution that's happened down there. There's like blind salamanders and all this crazy stuff. So
wow.
I was like, that sounds awesome. So I went, I did some research to find out how to get to this place in the Andes, and found the outfitters, found the cost and all that. And I talked to him and said, I found it all. Let's go do it. When do you want to do it? And he's like, are you kidding? I was drunk. I can't do that. I'm fat. I'll die. I'll go there. And I was like, my plans are foiled again. But while I was doing the research, I learned about stumble lacrosse on the internet. Like, this is 10 years ago, so it wasn't nearly as prevalent as it is now in terms of information. This is before Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. And I stumbled upon this stuff of ayahuasca, and I was like, And as they say, when you get the call for ayahuasca, it becomes kind of an obsession. And I talked to my wife about it. I said, I'm going to go to Peru, and I'm going to do this, indigenous plant medicine. And she was like, go for it. So I went down there, and at the time, I wouldn't say that I definitely wouldn't understand that I was operating with, these, maladaptive programs, or maybe not maladaptive, because I was pretty successful. I was pretty happy in my life. I had 2 great kids. But at the same time, I was also what you call a rational materialist, or a physicalist, an atheist. Like I believed in the, in the metaphysics of materialism, or physicalism, is more properly stated. And I remember flying on the long flight to Peru, because it's 3 flights from the Bay Area. And in my journal, this is it. Either there's going to be something more to this, or there's nothing more, or this is just the way it is. And I was comfortable with either outcome.
Okay.
And so I ended up in Peru, and the first night I was like, oh shit, I have this. There's more to this, obviously. Then it changed my life. Just the recognition that it no longer made sense that we could just be atoms, banging around this. And so that was a story of how I got a taste of this. And that's where I got the understanding. The blinders were off for a second, recognizing that, anytime I was drinking was to like hide something that was maladaptive, that I don't even know where it came from. This feeling of not being enough, or needing to, cover up shame.
So you did have a sense that you were not enough, but to your point, you said, but I was pretty successful. In fact, helped me to be successful. I had a wife and kids and a good business. And it was really more curiosity that brought you down there. And like you said, I wasn't really looking to sort of expose my ego for what it was and get in touch with my soul. You literally just went to have the adventure. And then during the actual experience, you started to notice there was a separate sense of you that felt shame. And that was, would you say that was kind of the first introduction to what your ego was? In the psychological?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for sure. And, on that journey, something, a metaphor that I really liked that the shaman told us about, because I didn't go to an indigenous shaman. I went to a Western shaman who was very, and the reason I chose this person was because he had, kind of a science background also. Okay. So he could talk my language. I worked for a pharmaceutical company for 5 years, and I was into that kind of stuff, and I'd done science in graduate school and whatnot. And so he could talk that talk, but he's also deeply immersed in the Vedic traditions of India, in the Hindu Valley. And I like that too. And so he could talk my language, which is one of the things that I kind of recommend for folks, is to, people are way into like, oh, it has to be authentic or whatnot. But, for me, I need to understand. Not everybody needs to understand. I like to have some sense of understanding. Yeah. And the way he explained the ego is when you're born, you come out of your mom, and the first thing they do is slap a Post-it note on you with your name.
Yeah.
It's Michael. And the next thing, you're son of so-and-so and son of so-and-so. And then you start getting all these Post-it notes of all these labels that start labeling you up. You know, and those labels could also be belief structures, core beliefs, identities, all the identities, all these Post-it notes on top of you that are given to you through life, you know, through your parents, through your family. And when you take some of these plant medicines, or, you know, many years of, you know, hardcore meditation, or you can do some of this with breath work, you know, some intense breath work practices, somatic breath work and such, holotropic breath work. You can get in a state where you see yourself without these labels, that define us, these Post-it notes. Yeah. And so you shed the Post-it notes and see what you are without the definitions. And then it's like, there's a clarity that comes from that, and an awareness of the actual Post-it notes. And I like that analogy because it resonated with me. And then said like, oh, okay, wow, there's much more to me than I thought, because I thought I was the Post-it notes.
Right? Yes. And that's what you would call the conditioned ego versus the intrinsic ego, right. Which I love your idea of that. The ego doesn't just cause us suffering. There's a real important part to having a separate sense of self. You said it's a feeling of separation that's necessary to do our work here on this planet while we're here. But that sense of separation doesn't cause us suffering. So can you speak a little bit more about that? I love that. Well,
at base, you need to know, like, it's something I've read before that I like this saying is, you need to know where to put the spoon, to which mouth to put the spoon, right? When you're eating, right? At base, you need to have that separation of knowing, so you can keep this, you know, this system that is, you know, fighting entropy at all times.
Such a great analogy. It really is. I love it.
System, yeah.
I love it.
And you need to keep this thing going, right? And so if you know, there's examples of many yogis who like barely eat because they're in this state of egoless bliss, and you know they're being tended to by the people that are tending to them, just because otherwise they'll just die. There's flies on them and stuff like that, and they're just in a state of bliss. And that is like transcending maybe the intrinsic ego already, so that there's just nothing really happening. There's no action going on to the world to eat, to take care of things, to have a family, to do all the things that we think are important in our lives. And then the conditioned ego, as I described, is those Post-it notes, all those things. And something you might be interested in is a lot of times with folks that I work with, they have an experience of some of their core like parts of themselves that are serve a protective function as a child, rear up very loud and vocally in the medicine space. And what I tell them is like, because those parts that are there and are, you know, have served the purpose, usually in childhood and maybe through, you know, early adulthood, or served the purpose at certain times to protect the person, right, from abuse, from whatever it could be. It rears its ugly head, and so, I'm trying to protect you. Why are you trying to kill me? And so the approach I take when that happens is to make peace with that part of self, that peace with that part of the ego, and tell that part, I'm not trying to kill you. I just don't need you right now. Why don't you calm down and rest, and I'll call on you when I need you, because you may need that protective part at some point in time. You know, if you're in a stressful situation where it would serve you in a way, but it doesn't have to be operating at all times. So rather than saying I'm trying to kill that part of myself, I tell them to make peace with it, to give it gratitude, and to tell it that thank you for what you've, you know, helped me when I was younger. I don't need you right now, but I'm not trying to eliminate you completely. And lots of times that languaging really has an impact on the person that I'm working with. They're like, oh, okay, and then it just kind of calms down.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So really, we're not talking about just ego, soul. We're talking about different components of a person. Like you said, one part of us is just trying to get the spoon to the mouth. One part of us has protective mechanisms that we may have developed to survive our childhood. that you don't want to let go of, but also don't want them to come out, and take the wheel of the car necessarily. And then there's this other part of us, which is what I would call the soul, and you may call something else. It's just an expanded state of consciousness that tells a little more of the truth outside of the separate sense of self. Am I getting this right?
Yeah. I mean, the soul for me is a tricky word because I mean, I like the Vedic traditions, which is like everything is made of consciousness. There's no purely fundamentally and at base, it's all consciousness. And like the material world, like this desk and all these things that we look at and we see it and we're like, oh, this is made of atoms. And then it's like, that's just what it looks. It looks as if it was made of atoms because that's how we relate to it. And, in our this Western understanding of what it is, but fundamentally it's all consciousness. And we also are consciousness. And this separated consciousness that looks out at the rest of consciousness might be what you call the soul. And all these patterns of, the soul, I think, is just a quiet witness that, has our best interest in mind, but isn't necessarily driving the ship. It's more like, and it can connect us and tell us and help us, the soul is really all of creation. I mean, for my thing. And so when we take plant medicine or do breath work or meditate for deeply, what actually happens is your brain metabolism actually goes down. They used to think it actually went up, like lit up like a Christmas tree, and what they found with fMRI studies and stuff repeatedly, time and time again, there hasn't been a study that has shown any increase in brain activation with psychedelics. It's always a decrease in metabolism. And so if you decrease in metabolism, that means, but you're having an increase in experience. Well, that's weird. No one's been able to explain that, but you actually, there's the barrier between this self and the rest of reality is actually more diminished. And it's more like a sieve or a cauldron. You get more of the external bit, and that adds to the guidance for the self. So when you're real separate, when you're real like tightened up, that's where you're just driven by those ego structures. And when you're more open, you're more connected with the soul, which I think is more than just an individual soul. I think it's like the wisdom of all of creation simultaneously connecting with that guidance.
I feel like you just laid out like a huge piece of wisdom that I don't even know if we're going to have time to walk through, because you're giving such a really cool viewpoint to me about just everything is blended together as consciousness, but there are sort of tight balls of consciousness or tighter densities where the ego is more constricted, contracted. And to me, I would say that causes a suffering. I mean, you can even feel it. You're either anxious, you're breathing rapidly, your chest is tight, your neck is tight, and you're saying your metabolism might actually be higher at that point physically because you are in a state of fight, flight, or freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're saying as you relax, whether that be simple relaxation, whether that be breath work, which I do in my meditations, or do a psychedelic experience, you're saying it sort of lowers the metabolism. It tells the body it doesn't have to feel so separate and feel so protected. And to your point, you said, I guide people through expanded states. So you're actually lowering your physical metabolism, expanding your state of consciousness. You said your brain waves go down.
Oh, your brain waves, metabolism. So in fMRI state, the brain is less active, right? But you're having, the weird thing is you're having a much more intense experience. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
You haven't experienced psychedelics, but it can be a lot. And then for somebody who's experiencing more than like I'm experiencing right now, I mean, geometric patterns, all this kind of stuff that's happening, but the brain metabolism is going down. So in the materialist perspective, right, or physicalist perspective, they say that the brain causes consciousness, right? So, but if brain metabolism is going down, but there is more phenomenological consciousness, then how do you explain? It's basically, it's counterintuitive. Before they used to think, the psychedelics stimulate that. But then when you talk about breath work or other experiences that psychedelic states happen in, they all have to do with lower brain metabolism. Like when you put someone in one of those G-force devices, the pilots and such, the blood goes down, brain metabolism goes down, and they can have a spiritual experience. Or someone has a heart attack, on the medical table, they have a near-death experience.
Wow, that is so fascinating. You know what I love about what you're saying? It's not. It actually is scientific, because. Yeah. I mean, to me, I've had very visceral experiences of like suffering through the ego, and then these expanded states where I'm just like blissed out in meditation. And it slowly stays and creeps into the day over time to just longer and longer periods, which is really cool. But I love what you're saying. There's like real science behind what you're saying. It's not woo-woo. It's literally like the plants are just giving you the ability to access more information. Wow, that is so cool. No wonder you got into it, because you were like you said, a very physicality type of person who had, you wanted to have physical experiences.
What's interesting is there's some wacky sort of like attempts at trying to fit this fact that I just described. That brain metabolism goes down, conscious experience goes up in this, negative correlation. And so there's a lot of wacky sort of theories to try and say like, oh, brain noise is going up. Okay, but brain noise is going up. Like, first of all, it's like 0.00001% of brain noise increases, but there's an organized sense to these psychedelic experiences. They're not just, wild. It's a very clear sense of awareness and of state of being, more clear oftentimes if you read the reports about people. It's the most clear like sense of being that they've experienced in their whole life. In fact, this life, this regular life, non-expanded state life, feels like a dream in comparison to those expanded states. So that doesn't make sense. And it's very interesting that this neuroscientist named Christoph Koch, who's like one of the most important neuroscientists of the 20th century, he just sort of dipped into this what's metaphysics called idealism, which is like, he used to be a physicalist whole life. He took mushrooms during COVID, and now he's like, oh, this actually doesn't make sense. And he's on. I've listened to a bunch of podcasts, and I've been following his work for some time, and it's very interesting. You just have to have one of these experiences, and it can change your life.
So what's your viewpoint on why the earth would provide such magnificent plants for us to use? And I know it's happened over thousands of years. I'm sure that people have done this, and it be still so hidden.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I don't know. There's a bunch of different hypotheses, but they're all woo, right? So one is that, that there's an interface and communication between, this cosmic mind, which is all of creation, and the separate beings, and that the cosmic mind is, which is all of creation, God, Great Spirit, Pachamama, whatever you want to call it, that it's trying to teach us something. And by teaching us, we learn. As we learn, it learns. Like, we're collecting information, and then when we pass away, that metabolism. If you follow that logical train of thought, if metabolism is going down, finally, when we dead, metabolism goes down to zero, and so we're fully in the expansion of all creation.
Okay.
So some people think that like dreams, dream states are kind of hints towards pointing to that deeper reality, and possibly, there's an interface between some of the plants and what the plants give and what we have. Something like DMT, dimethyltryptamine, NN, the NN type, is in almost all physical animals, and it's hugely psychedelic. And I think some people think that it's released when we're born and when we die, when we have childbirth, and certain traumatic experiences, it gives rise to that. So it's endogenous to us. Oh, it's why this stuff exists, I couldn't tell you. It's beyond my pay grade. But
I mean, it's a beautiful balance, or symmetry, I guess, to know that the earth would provide the opportunity to go to those places. Through
one
plants.
trippy thing is that you might find interesting is like humans have been on this planet, like modern humans. I think there's an argumentation about what the actual time is. 100,000, 300,000 years, somewhere in that window is pretty much like most people would agree.
Yeah.
But the state of symbolic reasoning that we have has not been around until 50,000 years. So there's been this long period of most of humanity's history where we weren't symbolic reasoners in the way that we are right now. And some folks hypothesize that it was the interfacing with these plants, this expanded consciousness, that put us into more contact with the rest of creation and actually sprung the culture of this symbolic reasoning, symbolic thinking. That's interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not an anthropologist, but that there is definitely an interface in some thoughts of the world's religions having to do with some of these plant medicines, like Moses in the burning bush. They think that's a Acacia hostilis plant, which is loaded up with DMT. In the Vedic traditions in the Indus Valley, they did some plant medicine called soma, which I think is a combination of Syrian rue and Acacia hostilis root bark. In the Amazonian tradition, you have ayahuasca, and there's these psychedelic plants everywhere, and they're telling us something about the deeper reality, and both in ourselves and in the rest of creation. So it's all speculative for me. I think it's interesting to think about, but I wouldn't. I don't know what the actual reality is in terms of why these plants are here.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of this podcast, though, what I'm guessing happened would be that we had some, I guess, as we've lessened our contact with nature and the sacredness of plants and so forth, the ego became more of a thinker, and the ego really took on all these labels and all these other things that maybe weren't the case anymore. I was thinking the other day about like the native people, even in our country, called each other, they didn't call each other like, Michael and Wynn, they call each other like the gray feather or something, where it seemed to have a lot more connection to what was actually around them, So I wonder if that is why the ego is necessary, but it's causing so much unnecessary suffering at this point. To your point, there's a conditioned ego that maybe would have one label on it, 1,000 years ago, and today it has 25. And then you're just kind of piled underneath that. And then going back to plant medicine for people, or breath work, or things that you do, could bring someone back to feeling the ego for what it is, the conditioned parts, which you described as a shame the first time you felt it, right? And then kind of, you sound like you could help people bring up those conditioned parts and then help them integrate it back into them, just calm it down as just like, okay, you're one of the tools in my toolbox, but I don't need you right now. And when you do come up, there's a higher source inside of me that will decide whether you're necessary or not, because maybe I do need protection from, something in the environment as a separate body that's metabolizing separately. So that's really cool. I love the way you're framing this. It makes so much sense to me. And I love that you can take people to these places where, like you said, they kind of blow open their awareness. And then as they come back down, you can have sort of these more general discussions about the thing that flared up, and that you don't have to suffer anymore. And that's just my goal for these podcasts, to help people go like, you don't have to suffer anymore. It's normal, but it's not necessary. It's normal to watch each other stress out and freak out. And, even our politics right now, like watch our two leaders go at each other's throats. It's like, it's so unnecessary, but it's normal. And so, we have to take our time and meet people like you who can guide someone towards those higher states of consciousness, and then sort of bring it back in and put the puzzle pieces back together. in a way that there's less suffering, but more awareness, or maybe more suffering at first. Cause like you said, I'm aware of the shame that I had. But you're there to
Oh,
walk.
but I don't even think that part is, you know, under the conditions of being with somebody who knows what they're doing, you know,
Yes.
a guide, right? It's not that suffering of an experience. I mean, some people do have an intense experience, but it's usually like a lot of clarity, like, oh, this is operating. Like, you can't change anything you're not aware of, right? And the idea is to respond rather than react to life, right? If you're just reacting based on some pre-programmed system, but once you say like, oh, this was operating in the background. And one of my favorite things to like, that I'm always shocked at I love when a client has, when a person has a therapist, and they come up with these like stories about their path or something that has like really impacted them. And I say, have you ever talked to your therapist about this? And they're like, no. And sometimes it's like, yeah, I know this story. Like, it's a memory of mine. I just didn't realize the impact it was having on my life. And then, and then, you know, going forward with the therapist to really unpack that and make sense of that, you know, because, you know, I don't have the relationship with the folks I work with that a therapist might have, which is like weekly stuff. It's just not what I do, but give them the tools to unpack and do that kind of stuff. And I would do follow-ups and stuff like that, but not on an ongoing, you know, lifelong basis. I think having a therapist is, you know, an incredible tool in the toolbox, but it surprises me every time where these things have just never come up into awareness as having the impact that they've had, these memories, these core beliefs, these ego structures, and it just never came up. And it's like, no, I never talked to my therapist about this. And it's like, wow, and I realized what an impact it's having on my life. And it's like, okay, fantastic. We can move on from here then.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that therapists should be more in touch with people that are doing the kind of work that you're doing and help go back and forth and help people process. Because I have had a client do the psilocybin, and she came in with pages and pages of things that came up that she didn't understand at the time. Like, why did this come up? And we were able to sit in the room and kind of talk through it in a way, which I'm sure you could too. But to your point, like sometimes therapists have more friendship-y type of relationship with the person where they can unwind more, do more weekly.
Well, I like to say like a therapist is so much more than your friend.
Yeah.
Because it's transactional, but it's a one-sided relationship where you can say anything. And, you know, never lie to your therapist, never lie to your lawyer, and never lie to your doctor, you know, because they can't work unless you're totally come clean with everything with them. It's a deep relationship.
It's been awesome to hear your viewpoint, and I learned a lot. I appreciate not having sort of this like dualistic idea in my mind about the ego and the soul, and more of a like comprehensive sort of blending together of different levels of consciousness that you can help people walk through at the highest levels, or, you know, integrate down at the lower level or the inner level of constriction around the ego. Sounds like you can help them discern a lot. So I really appreciate you talking through that with us today.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate you.
And so how do people find you, and where, and can you work with people all over the country?
Yeah, I have folks come in from all over the place. And they can find me at Michael Tierno Guide. That's MichaelTiernoguide.com. And they can click for a meeting get on my calendar, and we can talk about if this is right for them.
Okay. And then, but for in-person, you're in California.
I'm in California.
Right? But you can work with people anywhere to sort of prepare for.
Yeah, people fly in for it.
Okay.
People come from all over the country to do this. You know, I usually say 3 days, show up the day before, we do the experience the day after, and then you can leave the day after. I don't like folks having to do a lot of go to work the day right after, or get back into life. They can stay for 4 days and spend a day in nature. I'm very close to a lot of wonderful hikes and places, and just spend some time digesting and understanding and unpacking what the experience was like and how it impacts one. And the expanded state, like there was just a study in July 2024 in Nature that the what do you call it, neuroplasticity in the brain, well, they call it desynchronization in this paper, lasts for about 2 to 4 weeks after the experience. So if you're you have the experience, you have the awareness of what you need to do. Let's say it's not drinking, if you can build a new habit in that 2 to 4 weeks, then it's more likely to stick because your brain is kind of like fresh tracks on snow rather than deep grooves, in the snow tracks. So, so it's really important to like commit to do the things that you are aware of needing to do right after.
Yeah. And I just
love really integrate that.
I just love that people like you are doing this stuff and can help walk us through it. I just think it's the next level of human.
It's a huge honor to do it. It's a huge honor to do it. And it's a huge honor to see, get the appreciation and gratitude, even though the person is doing the work, right? I'm just holding a container and helping guide them without judgment and with total curiosity. But it's really impressive to see these folks really come to clarity. Many folks have gotten off of psych meds because they don't need them anymore. There's they have to get off of them to, with the help of a doctor, or there's some online pharmacist that'll help titrate them off of psych meds because they can be either contraindicated or they can lead to no effect. And then they're done. And then they're like, I'm not on Lexapro or Prozac anymore. I haven't been on it for 6 months since I've done the journey. It's just because I'm able to now recognize and deal with life in its fullness. And that's really satisfying to me, honestly.
That would be, that's awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.